Recently, videos criticizing Singapore have been appearing on Chinese social media, filled with complaints and harsh remarks.
前几天我看别人说在上海卖了2套房子。
The other day, I saw someone say they sold 2 apartments in Shanghai and were planning to move to Singapore for an easy life. Seriously? How could anyone think that's a good idea? Let me tell you, Singapore is the most nitpick country in the world. No exaggeration. The rules there are endless. It's worse than being in prison. Eating gum on the subway? That's a $150 fine. Sounds like a small penalty, right? But if you walk too close to someone, you could be fined thousands for loitering. If I put up a small flyer on a bridge to look for a job or hire a nanny, I get caned. And I'm not talking about a light slap. It's real caning, breaking skin, drawing blood, and knocking people unconscious after just 3 strikes. There are many things you just can't do in Singapore. Rent an apartment, you might not be allowed to use the kitchen. Walk down the street, better keep your voice down. Eat a bowl of noodles, don't even think about slurping. It's not that people want to break the rules, but can you really live like that without feeling suffocated? Is Singapore really as the man described? Some media reports suggest that Singapore's extensive fines stem from its strict rule of law, which is known for its regulations. From littering and spitting in public to smoking in restricted areas and chewing gum, nearly every aspect of public behavior is regulated. Even being seen naked in one's own home by a neighbor can result in a fine. The Singaporean government believes that strict laws are necessary to maintain social order. The country's first Prime Minister, Lee Kuan Yew, once explained that Singapore lacks natural resources and can only survive and grow through discipline and order. This strict legal framework has gained widespread support among Singaporeans. Many believe that these laws have helped make Singapore one of the safest, cleanest, and most efficient countries in the world. According to Gallup's 2023 Global Law and Order Index, which surveyed 141 countries and regions, Singapore ranked first. However, these strict rules often feel overwhelming for many Chinese visitors. In China, behaviors such as spitting in public, speaking loudly, and casually discarding cigarette butts are common, and many people are accustomed to operating within a society based on personal connections. As a result, some Chinese find themselves unintentionally violating Singapore's regulations. Beyond complaints about fines, some online users have criticized Singapore for its small size, referring to it as poor county, to suggest that it's no bigger than a Chinese county. So this so-called developed country, this garden city Singapore, is actually a mess. Just look at its traffic. Chaotic is the only word for it. The streets are filled with old energy gas-powered cars. You barely see any electric vehicles, and there are even diesel cars still running. Isn't that bad for air quality? And for such a wealthy land, most private cars are cheap ones under 100,000 yuan. If you see a BMW 3 Series, that's considered a luxury ride. But the funny thing is, even those luxury cars don't have sunroofs. Isn't that just pretending to be rich? Like they can afford the car, but not the upgrades? Motorcycles are even worse. People ride them in flip-flops, and there aren't even dedicated motorcycle lanes. Bikers weave through traffic like it's nothing, and modified exhaust pipes are everywhere, blasting noise and disturbing residents. Singapore has one of the highest population densities in the world. The roads are already overcrowded, so why haven't they banned motorcycles? And if that wasn't bad enough, look at the trucks driving through the city. Aren't they restricted? These so-called trucks are openly carrying people in the cargo area. That's a serious traffic violation. Mixing people with cargo is a huge safety risk. But in a supposedly international metropolis like Singapore, it's just business as usual. Anyone who still says Singapore is well managed and highly developed, well, I'm not going to argue, but I strongly disagree. At best, Singapore is like a poorly run small country. Other jingoistic Chinese, otherwise known as little pinks, have gone even further, with nationalist voices claiming that Singapore, along with Taiwan, should be reunified with China.
新加坡人非常讨厌坡县这个词儿，是吧？
Singaporeans hate it when people call their country poor county, right? But let's be honest, in our minds, that's not even an insult, it's just a nickname. From a national and historical perspective, Taiwan and Singapore are both bound to return to China eventually. As early as the Yuan dynasty, China had already set up administrative offices to overseas places like Taiwan, Singapore, and the Java Islands. These were all part of China's South China Sea trade routes. China has exercised sovereignty over the South China Sea since the Yuan dynasty. If Taiwan is reunified, then Singapore and Java should naturally be reclaimed as well. Why leave them out? If there's ever a direct confrontation with the United States, it won't be just about Taiwan. Singapore will be part of it too. And if that happens, we might as well take it back. Singapore is one of the world's most important shipping hubs, and we need to regain control over it. More than 90% of Singapore's population is Chinese, and no matter what they say about being Singaporean or independent, That doesn't change the facts. Plenty of places in the world want independence, but that doesn't mean they'll get it. Taiwan wants independence too, but remember, China's territory is determined by 1.4 billion Chinese people. If we put it to a vote, Singapore would have to return. Just like Taiwan, there's no alternative. While nationalists portray Singapore as an insignificant place, the city-state's economic strength and global influence are widely recognized by Western nations. Singapore has leveraged its strategic port location and strong financial regulations to become a major international financial center. According to data from the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, Singapore's financial markets are highly competitive on a global scale. The city has become a hub for international trade, banking, and insurance, attracting numerous multinational corporations to establish their regional headquarters there. Singapore's role in global finance has also grown in response to changes in Hong Kong's market. The implementation of the Hong Kong National Security Law in June 2020 affected investors' confidence in Hong Kong as Asia's financial hub. At the same time, Singapore's relatively stable political environment, transparent and efficient financial regulations, and commitment to innovation and digital transformation have drawn financial institutions to shift their operations there. As a result, Singapore's appeal in global financial markets has surged, with increasing foreign investment, institutional expansion, and improved rankings in international financial indices. Despite its small land area, Singapore's role as a key economic hub has made it a vital bridge for trade between the East and the West. Statistics show that in 2023, Singapore ranked 5th in the world for GDP per capita, maintaining its position as the highest in Asia. Data compiled by The Economist further indicates that Singapore's GDP per capita reached $82,800. Ironically, these statistics and other positive social indicators are rarely mentioned by little pinks.
在新加坡不是破县哈。
Singapore is not just some small county. People keep calling it poor county, but does China even have a county this advanced? Yes, Singapore is small, but its per capita GDP is over $80,000, more than 8 times ours. It has universal healthcare. Everyone has a home, with no unfinished buildings left to rot. It's a garden city. Which county in China has the same thing? You can't smoke anywhere you want, so the streets aren't littered with cigarette butts and plastic bags. Public spaces are orderly, no one shouts, and everyone queues properly. The education system is designed to nurture individual talents, with an open and guided approach instead of rote memorization. Which county in China has this level of development? Some online users have pointed out that Singapore's criticism is, in some ways, also a reflection of China's own issues. They question whether complaints about Singapore's excessive competition should prompt a discussion about China's own struggles with intense social pressure. Similarly, they suggest that while criticizing Singapore's harsh laws, there should also be a reflection on China's lack of legal enforcement. And when pointing out Singapore's elitism, they ask whether China's own rigid social hierarchy should also be examined. The frequent attacks on Singapore by nationalist voices are driven by a mix of long-standing anti-foreign sentiment and complex political factors. Some scholars believe that decades of hate education under the Chinese Communist Party have deeply influenced the attitude of Chinese people. For years, government propaganda has promoted the idea that China must be strong and secure its place in the world. As a result, when people see a small country like Singapore with a highly developed economy and hear its leaders commenting on China's policies, they often react with hostility and emotional responses. This sentiment is evident online. If a TikToker posts about spending half a month's salary on one dinner in Singapore, thousands quickly join in to share similar frustrations. If someone complains, "I was fined 1,000 Singaporean dollars for drinking water on the subway," the comments section erupts, with many eager to weigh in. Beyond criticizing Singapore, these nationalist voices also share a strong commitment to defending China's rise. They are highly sensitive to foreign affairs and react strongly to any perceived unfriendly actions or statements from Singapore. Whenever Singapore makes comments or policy moves that are seen as unfavorable to China, these little pinks launch fierce online attacks, expressing their anger through aggressive language. For example, in online discussions, some have claimed Singapore is just an imperialist pawn of the United States, always trying to interfere in the South China Sea dispute, or Singaporean Chinese have been completely westernized and no longer remember their Chinese heritage. These statements overlook Singapore's complex geopolitical position and its diplomatic strategy, which is based on survival and economic interests, rather than opposition to China. Some online influencers take this even further, equating Singapore's social policies and legal system with being a puppet of the Western bloc.
朋友们，今儿我可能又要炸粪坑了啊！
Alright, folks, I might be stirring up trouble again today. On the 18th, a certain Singaporean newspaper published an editorial criticizing China for focusing too much on national security, warning that it could hurt economic growth, destabilize society, and ultimately affect national security. Are they serious? Do they really think we should throw open our doors and let anyone walk in just to avoid being labeled too focused on security? Do they really think we should be content living as slaves just to keep the economy running? Chinese people value peace. We want stability and a good life for everyone. But are we given that chance? Do they respect our right to live freely? Are Chinese people not human? Over the years, I've known plenty of people who moved to Singapore. Many even changed their nationality. I've had friends try to persuade me to go there too. But to be honest, I can't stand Singapore. I've never considered it the gold standard of Chinese society. That place is full of selfish, self-serving elites who only look out for themselves. If I had to describe them, they're fake, selfish, and shameless. You know that saying, the worst kind of person is an educated scoundrel? That describes them perfectly. Compared to Singaporeans, Malaysian Chinese have far better values. To me, Singapore isn't a truly developed country. It's just a Southeast Asian version of modern-day Okinawa, a pawn of global capital, a parasite living off bigger nations. Maybe they should start showing some dignity. Some little pinks have even interpreted certain immigration and visa policies in Singapore as being anti-China or designed to exclude Chinese people. However, data shows that Chinese nationals remain one of the largest groups among foreign workers and international students in Singapore. In recent years, Singapore has also signed multiple cooperation agreements with China, indicating that it is not outright rejecting Chinese engagement. However, in the narratives of some little pinks, any statement or policy that does not fully align with China's interests is exaggerated as hostile, fueling more patriotic online debates. Political factors also play a role in this dynamic. As US-China relations remain tense, Singapore has positioned itself as an intermediary between the two powers rather than taking sides. This approach is reflected not only in diplomatic rhetoric, but also in economic, military, and cultural exchanges. Trade data shows that as of 2023, bilateral trade between Singapore and the United States exceeded $50 billion US dollars, while trade with China reached more than $60 billion US dollars. According to official statistics from both China and Singapore, China has been Singapore's largest trading partner since 2013, accounting for 12.8% of Singapore's total merchandise trade in 2022. In 2023, total bilateral trade between China and Singapore reached over $115 billion US dollars. Singapore is also a key economic and research partner for the United States. It is the third largest Asian investor in the US. While the US is Singapore's largest foreign investor, in 2022, bilateral trade between the two countries totaled $100 billion US dollars. Additionally, Singapore is a major security partner for the US. Under a bilateral defense agreement, U.S. forces are allowed to use Singapore's air and naval bases until 2035. A senior fellow at the Singapore Institute for International Affairs, O.E. Sun, told Voice of America that Singapore's foreign policy largely reflects the stance of other ASEAN countries. He explained that major Southeast Asian nations, including Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia, have long sought to play a key role in balancing relations between the U.S. and China. While these countries want the U.S. to maintain a strategic presence in the region, they also continue to prioritize trade with China. At the same time, the Chinese government does not want Singapore to align too closely with Western nations. When the Russia-Ukraine war began, Nicholas Fang, managing director of Singapore-based market research firm Black Dot Research, noticed a surge in Chinese language content circulating among Singapore's Mandarin-speaking population. These messages frame the war as being caused not by Russia, but by the West and NATO. The source of these messages were difficult to trace, but their language, themes, and viewpoints led analysts to suspect they originated from China. An associate professor of political science at the National University of Singapore, Chong Jia Ian, believes China is using such messaging to foster anti-US sentiment in Singapore. He suggests that if a future conflict were to break out between the US and China in Asia, Beijing might hope to leverage public resistance in Singapore to disrupt government decision-making or at least delay its response. However, whether this strategy will be effective remains uncertain. Fang believes the key factor is whether Singapore's Chinese population will take a strong stance and pressure the government to shift its policies. So far, he said, this has not happened. Reports indicate that the Singaporean government is actively countering China's influence on its Chinese-speaking population. Through the narrative of a distinct Singaporean Chinese identity, it seeks to push back against China's messaging efforts. At the same time, Singapore continues to maintain a delicate balance in the ongoing US-China rivalry, navigating its position carefully, much like walking a tightrope.